Listening, even if they don't know Hebrew, are going to have heard this. So say it one more time, nice and slow, verse, chapter, verse.
I'll read the key part slowly. Mo'adei Yehovah asher tikra'u otam mikra'ei kodesh elehem mo'adei.
Boy, oh boy. Mo'adei.
Mo'adei. So the key word is mo'adei, which is a form of the word mo'adim. Mm-hmm. And mo'adim are appointed times. It's the same word in Genesis 1:14 where it says that God created the sun and the moon for, among other things, mo'adim, for the appointed times. Then in we have Psalm 104, I believe it is, where it says Asayarech mo'adim. He created the moon for the appointed times. So we've got mo'ed is the singular and mo'adim is the plural. And, you know, we use the word feast, or Jonah's translation uses the word feast. But if you want to be more specific, Hebrew has two words here. The one is mo'ed, or plural mo'adim, appointed times, and the other word is chag. And chag is the word that you see more often translated as feast. And chag is a more specific term. Among the mo'adim, you only have three chag, only three that are chagim, or chag. Chag is the term that could be translated as feast, but more specifically, it's a pilgrimage feast. Can we do a quick rundown of what the feasts are and everything, and what the appointed times, or
we're going to read them, aren't we? They're right here in the chapter.
Okay, well, can I give an overview first? Or
sure, why not?
Sure. Read the whole passage. Okay, so first of all, we've got Shabbat. And by the way, there's another term which is Mikra Kodesh that was also in the passage we read. Mikra Kodesh is usually translated as Holy Convocation, which is really interesting because the word convocation, in English at least, implies that there's a gathering. But in Hebrew, it doesn't necessarily mean that. It can mean that, but it could also mean a holy proclamation. That's another way of translating that. And that actually makes sense. You could legitimately read this as, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, the appointed times of the Moadim of Yehovah, which you shall proclaim them as holy proclamations. These are my appointed times. So what you are to do to the holy convocations isn't to convocate on them, but to proclaim them. And that is to proclaim them to be days of proclamation, that you proclaim them to be holy. Well, so, all right, so we've got, first of all, we have Shabbat, which is you work for 6 days and rest in the seventh. I think that's pretty self-explanatory to most people. Then you've got Chag HaMatzot, or the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And a lot of people confuse that with Passover, because in later Hebrew, we refer to the whole feast as Passover. But in the Tanakh, or in the Torah specifically, in the Old Testament, throughout the Hebrew Bible, Chag HaMatzot is the name of the holiday, Feast of Unleavened Bread. And Pesach is the name of the sacrifice. It's not the name of the feast. It's the name of the sacrifice that's brought at the beginning of the feast. That's 7 days. And of those 7 days, the first and the seventh day are Mikra Kodesh. Mikra Kodesh, that's holy proclamation. And the significance of Mikra Kodesh is you're not permitted to work on a Mikra Kodesh. So first and seventh day of the 7 days of unleavened bread, days of rest. Then during those 7 days, we've got the day of the waving of the Omer. Then we got the 50 days of the counting of the Omer. Then the 50th day then is the Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost in Keith's tradition. In Hebrew, it's called Chag HaShavuot, or simply Shavuot, the Feast of Shavuot. Here the word Chag, again, implies the pilgrimage feast. It also has two other names in the Torah. The other one is Chag HaKatzir, the Feast of Harvest, and the other is Yom HaBikurim, the Day of First Fruits. Now, this is something I see a lot, especially in Hebrew Roots movement, where they confuse the Day of First Fruits. They think that that's the day of the waving of the Omer. The day of the waving of the Omer is during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The 50th day counted from that is called in the Torah Yom HaBikurim, day of the first fruits, also Chag HaShavuot, Feast of Shavuot, and the Feast of Harvest. And then we have the third feast is in the 7th month, along with 2 other days. We've got Yom Teruah, also called Zichron Teruah, which is a day of Teruah. Really, I would translate as noise making, but it can also mean, sometimes it means trumpeting or shouting, so day of shouting or day of trumpets. Also Zichron Teruah, which could be translated as memorial shouting, or it could be mentioning shout. And some people explain that means to mean the Yom Teruah is the day of mentioning the name of Yehovah, of mentioning God's name. Because from that word Zichron.
I know some people who think that way.
Okay, I'll let you talk. I'm almost done. Yom Kippur, we call it Yom Kippur in common speech, but actually it's called Yom Kippurim, the Day of Atonement. That's the 10th day of the 7th month. Yom Teruah is the first day. Yom Kippurim is the 10th day of the 7th month. And then we have Chag HaSukkot, the Feast of Booths, or some people call it the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot. And that's the third of the feasts. And that's also called Chag HaAsif, the Feast of Ingathering. And then that's a 7-day feast. And then the 8th day of that feast, which isn't technically part of the feast, is also a Mikra Kodesh, a day of rest.